Okay, let's talk about what you need to get started in your commercial real estate practice. First of all, boards. We have a commercial board called FITCAR, Florida Gulf Coast Realtors Association, or Association of Realtors, I should say. Most brokers locally, most commercial brokers locally belong to FITCAR, and some of them elect to belong to the Commercial Information Exchange, which is part of FITCAR, which is another database for posting your listings, and it's actually pretty good. You may find listings on the CIE, which is called Catalyst, that are not on CoStar or LoopNet. So it's a good secondary resource for you for posting your listings and also for searching. The other board that you might want to belong to is called the Business Brokers of Florida. Your broker must belong to BBF for you to join, and the cost is fairly nominal, $150 a year. Well worth it, because they have all the forms that you'll need to list a business and sell a business, and the confidentiality agreements and so forth that are very important when you're working with business opportunities. In addition to that, a tool that you might want to look into is called Prospect Now. Prospect Now, all one word, .com, is a tool I've used successfully to do direct mail campaigns and also to look up true owners of property. You can get their phone numbers and their email addresses by belonging to Prospect Now. You'll pay based upon the number of counties that you want to be prospecting in. Okay, this is a standard commercial listing agreement, which you should be using. Of course, you've got the owner's information up here, and then your brokerage would be listed, who will be representing the property. Legal description, if there happens to be an address, that's great. The address and the legal description needs to go here for however many parcels are part of this listing agreement. There may not be a address for a piece of land, but you should have a parcel identifier. The price, the asking price, will go here in the terms. In this case, there's no seller financing provided. In this section, you're going to indicate whether the listing is going to go on MLS. If you're not a member of MLS, then obviously you can't post a listing on MLS, and you'll be putting it on the other commercial websites such as LoopNet, CoStar, and the FITCAR database website. This section of page 2 has to do with how a co-broker is going to be paid, what they're going to be paid. Typically, in commercial, you split the commission that's paid by the seller. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's what's customary. And when we're talking about commissions on smaller versus larger deals, the larger deals, you will be expecting to receive a smaller commission than you would a smaller deal. For example, if you've got a listing that's over $2 million, you may not, although you may not be able to get the seller to pay a 5% commission or 6% commission. You may have to settle for a 4% or even less if it's more than that. And I was representing a couple hotels, and I was only going to get paid 1%. So there was a total of 2% available on this deal, on the larger deal. So don't get become dismayed if the commission seems to be too low. Many times the sellers realize that there's just only a certain value that they will put on our services, and they will not pay a commission beyond that. But don't let that bother you. Try to get, on the smaller deals, try to get your usual 5-6%, and if it's land, you may be able to get up to 10% on vacant land. That's fairly customary for vacant. Okay, let's look at page 3 of the commercial listing agreement for a commercial property for sale. Here's where the gross commission is indicated. As you can see on this one, it's 6%. It can also be expressed as a fixed amount. Coming down here, if your listing is terminated by the seller, this is where you would indicate a cancellation fee. I typically don't do that. I think it gets in the way of listing properties, so I typically will let them out anytime, for any reason, unless we are, of course, actively negotiating or are under contract. This was put into the listing agreement a few years ago because folks were selling property and not getting paid. So I think it was done at the state level. They allowed us to put a lien on the property that was sold for the amount of commission that is due. And I was involved in a lawsuit years ago where we did not get paid, and it was before this lien agreement was in place. So we had to sue the seller, and it took a while to get paid, but we eventually got paid. So make sure you've got your commission agreements in place in writing. No handshakes. Make sure you've got a good commission agreement, and I'll show you one in a little bit that you can use in the event that you don't take an exclusive listing right to list. You can always have the seller sign a commission agreement. It's almost like an open listing. Okay, we saw the right to sale agreement. I didn't show page number 4. Page number 4 is really the signature page, so there's no point in going over that. This is the right to lease agreement, and of course at the top you've got the beginning and the ending dates for this agreement. When can you start showing it for lease, and when does this lease agreement end? And of course you've got the owner of the property and the broker listed. This property is currently occupied, but many times they're not. And if there's somebody in there, when does their lease end? And so that could be important, because that your new tenant cannot move in before that date. What's the base rent? In this case, it's $20 per square foot, calculated on an annual basis. And then additionally, there's a $5.50 here per square foot of common area maintenance, which takes care of many of the expenses that the landlord pays, is being pushed to the tenant as a CAM. So totally we have a rent of $25.50, and you multiply that by the square feet that you're renting, and you get your annual gross income that the landlord should be receiving. And the landlord has to charge the tenant sales tax on top of that, and pay, of course, the Department of Revenue, the sales tax that they collect. The amount of security that the owner wants me to collect, that they will hold, and if there's advanced rent, how much that's going to be. These can be indicated here. Below are the obligations of the seller, not the seller, but the owner, the landlord, and the obligation of the agent that is going to be representing the property. Okay, let's look at another page in this right to lease agreement, and keep in mind that this is not a comprehensive discussion of these agreements, but just some highlights of stuff that you need to, particularly be attentive to as you're working with them. Certainly you're concerned about how you're going to get paid, so the commission that you're charging the landlord, let's say it's 5%, is 5% of the rent that the landlord will collect over the first term of the lease. So if the first term is 3 years, then you're going to get 5% of the gross revenue calculated for those 3 years. Typically, if there's CAM, which we talked about earlier, you don't get a commission on the CAM. So the earlier example, the base rent was $20. That's what you're going to get paid for, not for the CAM. And also, obviously you don't get paid a commission on sales tax. So how are you going to collect that? Well, it's common that you would receive 50% of the total commission that is due at the time the lease is signed by all parties, and another 50% when the tenant occupies the space. Unfortunately, from time to time, tenants sign leases and then they end up not occupying. So you've collected half of your commission, and typically what I would do in that situation is to tell the landlord that I will help them get the next tenant at no charge. Okay, and if it's a large amount of money, and it can be $20,000, $30,000 commission on a 10-year lease for a national tenant, you may have to receive your commission in installments. That's something that you'll have to figure out, maybe with the help of your broker. It could be so much money that it's more money than the landlord is going to be taking in initially, and he wants to spread it out over a period of time so he can pay it from the rent that he's going to collect. And there's going to be co-brokers for this listing who are going to want to get paid. And how are they going to be paid? Well, that's specified here. In this case, it's 2.5% for co-broker, which is half of the commission that's to be paid. And what kind of representation are you providing your client, in this case the landlord? That would be specified here. Okay, let's look at a proposal or letter of intent. This one was drawn up by the landlord or the landlord's management company. This is the prospective tenant here. This is the landlord or the landlord's management company. This specifies the location that is being considered to be leased, who the landlord is, and the trade name. In this case, I was representing a tenant that had an insurance agency. They were looking for a location for their insurance agency called Alliance Insurance. This particular location was off of Bruce B. Downs in New Tampa. In this area, it is specified, the size of the space and its legal address. Included in this proposal is a breakdown of what the payments will be over the term, in this case a 5-year term. You can see that in the first year the monthly amount that the tenant's going to have to pay is $25 02.08, and then it goes up based upon the terms of the lease, which are spelled out here. We get a 3% increase every year. So here's the 5-year schedule of the base rent, and then the additional rent, which we refer to as CAM occasionally. So here's the CAM, and spelling out the insurance, how much the insurance will be per square foot, and how much the real estate taxes will be. So there's additional charges beyond the base rent that this tenant is going to have to pay every month. All right, this is the next page of the proposal, and keep in mind this proposal was put together by the landlord and was presented to me, and then I presented it to my client, who is the prospective tenant. The proposal could have also come from the tenant to the landlord. We as agents could help them with that proposal. There are some templates that you can use to help you put together a proposal. This is the next page of the proposal that we've been talking about. And in this particular instance, there is a tenant improvement allowance, also called TIA, that is provided to the tenant for build out of his space. In this case, they are providing $5 per square foot. The landlord's providing $5 per square foot to the tenant for building out the space for their business. Amounts to about $6,000, to do that. So the tenant will have to either use the landlord's crew to do the build out, or the tenant will find their own contractor to do the build out and provide invoices to the landlord, and the landlord will then reimburse the tenant up to the $6,000 amount. That's the maximum. Down here, signage, very important. What signage is going to be available, and is there going to be approval necessary for the signage? And typically landlords do want to approve the sign that you're going to have on the building, and any sign that you might have also on the road is going to need landlord approval. If you are planning on putting signage on your windows of your space, that will also have to be approved. So that's pretty much it for a proposal. I'll give you kind of a good working document that has everything that needs to be covered in a proposal that you put together for your client, the tenant, or for the landlord. The landlord may have their own proposals that they will provide you. Of course, once you start practicing commercial real estate sales, you will want to have a card, and your card can reflect your specialty. In this case, this card is for retail property, sales, leasing, and investments of retail property. You may not be doing retail property. You may be doing industrial. You may be specializing in office, maybe doing business sales. But in any event, you need to have one or more cards which you can provide to prospective clients and other brokers as you meet them, that talks about your specialty. Okay, this document is an example of a marketing plan that you could put together for your client to explain to them how you're going to market their property if they give you a listing. Here's some of the things that you might want to have in your package that you provide prospective purchasers. cover page, description, map with annotations, photographs, comps, demographics, traffic counts. So I will show you how to get all of these things. There are a number of products out there that will give you this information pretty readily. A flyer, develop your own flyer. I use Microsoft Publisher to create my flyers. And what are you going to do after you have all these marketing materials? Well, you need to do a direct mailing, perhaps, visit prospects. In addition, you're going to be ordering a for sale sign if the seller will allow a for sale sign on the property. Many times they won't. If it's an income producing property, they don't want their tenants knowing it's for sale, or even if the tenants know it's for sale, they may not want a for sale sign because it may be a problem with their customers. So if their customers think that the property is for sale, they may stop doing business with those particular tenants. So the sale signs are problematic. Many times we don't have for sale signs on a lot of property, especially income property. List of the websites that you are going to tell the seller that you're going to publish the property on, and the fact that you're going to pitch the property in meetings with other commercial brokers. All right, this document is really for a landlord that is considering using you to find a tenant for his property. In this case, it was in Madeira Beach, on that little strip near the beach. There's a number of little retail spots along that strip, and I was hoping to get a bakery or a small restaurant into this space. So you've got some of the same information that you had on the for sale flyer, except you're going to be doing comps on other properties that are for lease or have leased. Flyer is going to reflect the fact that it's for lease, all the salient information about the property, including photographs, will be included in that flyer. If it looks like it might be a good fit for a national brand, you might take a look at the chain store prospects, and I've got a list of chain store contacts if you want to do that. A lease sign is, you're more likely to be allowed to have a for lease sign on the building or in the window than a for sale sign, as I spoke of earlier. Same basic postings as you will be doing for sale, you'll be doing for lease. And also you can pitch your property that you're leasing to the other commercial brokers at the pitch sessions that I mentioned earlier. Okay, let's look at this commission agreement that I mentioned earlier. In the event that you can't get a listing agreement either for leasing or for selling, here's a little agreement that it may not meet the muster of every attorney, but I've used it before and it's very, very straightforward. Basically says that if my company presents, my broker presents, and anyone that represents my broker, which would be me, presents a purchase contract with the terms and price acceptable to the seller, I agree to pay the brokerage this stated commission amount of the contract price. This could also be used to be modified a little bit for leasing purposes, but this one is for selling. And further states that it's only required that the seller pay a commission if the sale goes through and there's a closing, and that the seller receives his proceeds. Location of the property, the asking price, this would be the price that you're going to be trying to get as you're working with buyers. And then the seller has to sign it. If there's multiple owners, then you have a second seller sign it. And then you as the agent for the broker would sign the last line of this. So this gives you something. It's a lot better than the seller just telling you, hey, you bring me a buyer and I'll pay you. And I'm sure you've heard that before. Maybe if you've worked with FSBOs, you've heard that. But most brokers and agents that I know of will not work on that basis, and I don't recommend that you do. Although some bigger deals have been done on that basis, we don't want to see you be disappointed by not having an agreement in writing and then have it your commission not be paid. Okay, let's look at a estimated net sheet, which you should have been doing for your residential deals. I always create a net sheet whenever I have a contract to submit to my seller, so the seller has a sense of what they're going to net out, what their proceeds are going to be if they close with this particular buyer. And it does say here in the bottom that this is strictly an estimate, but we want them to sign this, which just indicates that we have in fact done our due diligence in creating an estimate of what we expect the costs are going to be for the sale of this property. So this is a good thing to have, and if you haven't created one in Excel that you can mess around with to create different what-if scenarios, and maybe give your seller a couple different net sheets based upon different figures that the seller might consider as counter offers to the one that's coming in, give him a sense of what his bottom line is going to be if he counters instead at 1.4, if he counters at 1.45 or 1.5, you'll get another net sheet which shows him what his proceeds will be at that revised selling price. I hope that helps.